Okay. Um, thank you. Thank you all for joining us. I am extremely thrilled because this is probably the largest crowd we have had for our AppSciComm conversations. Um, and that's a sort of credit to Kathleen and to Erin. Welcome to our next edition of AppSciComm Conversations. I'll just kick things off with a little bit of a brief introduction because it looks like there are a lot of new people. Welcome, everybody. AppSciComm is the Appalachian Science Communicators. This is a regional science writers group that we formed over a year ago now. We are connected with, but I don't think there's an official connection with the National Association of Science Writers. We are part of the larger group. And the goal, the reason we formed this group was to actually create a group and a community in the Appalachian region, which we found to be lacking in a science writers group for support, camaraderie, professional development. Just before I kick things off, just a couple of housekeeping items. We are always looking for members. If you are, please feel free to join us. You can either just sign up on the contact form on our website or search for AppSciComm on Facebook, on our Facebook groups. And more importantly, we are looking for volunteer leaders to help lead some more of our events and programming. So as some of you may know, last year we won a grant from the National Association of Science Writers, one of their idea grants, to conduct a regional workshop that has now was put on hold for COVID. But actually, we now have the opportunity to think that through a little bit more and maybe create even 2 events. To bring together our science writers, communicators in the region, and anybody who's interested, really. So if you are interested in more of our participating in our programming and helping guide the future of AppSciComm, please let us know. You could feel free to message me, just put a note in the chat. The time commitments are not large, and I will tell you that we tend to adhere to the fact that many hands make light work, so we will do that. We're also sort of in the process of hopefully moving to a 401c3, so 501c3, not 401c3, sorry. So we can raise funds for other events and things that that will help us all. And with that, if anybody has any questions, I'll answer them, but otherwise I'm going to turn it over to the wonderful Erin Hare, who's the host for this evening. And welcome, Kathleen.
Yeah, and thanks so much. Thanks everybody for joining us. So it's my pleasure to introduce Kathleen Davis, who's a producer on Science Friday, which I'm sure that you've all heard on NPR because it plays on stations, 400 NPR stations around the country. It's brought to you by WNYC Studios in New York, the big times. Previously, though, Kathleen was a technology and general assignment reporter at WESA here in Pittsburgh. And then before that, a production assistant at Michigan Radio in Ann Arbor. Her reporting has also appeared on NPR's Morning Edition and Weekend Edition, as well as The Pulse, which is a science public radio show from WHYY in Philadelphia. So welcome, Kathleen. Thank you for joining us. And I'm just gonna ask you some questions, just get to know you, your trajectory, a little bit about, what it's like to work in radio. And then I also want to open it up to the audience. So if you've got a burning question, maybe switch on your camera and you can ask it. But I'll kick it off with, just really general. Can you just tell us a little bit about yourself? I mean, how did you get into science journalism? Like, why the radio? And just like, what was your path?
Sure. And thank you for having me. This is just really cool and exciting for me. And I see some familiar faces and some familiar names from my time in Pittsburgh. So it's nice to see everybody. So I've always been interested in science. I've always been interested in writing. I mean, I was one of those kids that was just like obsessed with animals, and I was always reading and always writing like fake little newspapers for my family. And so this is something I've always kind of been interested in, but I really started doing this for real in college. I started writing for I went to school at the University of Michigan. I started writing for the newspaper there. And I really got into the idea of being a journalist as a career path. So in my senior year of college, I got an internship with Michigan Radio, which is the NPR station that serves the state of Michigan statewide. And it was very convenient because they are based in Ann Arbor, which is where I was going to college. So I kind of like to say that I sort of fell into the audio world a little bit. It wasn't something that I had really thought about that extensively before I got this internship. But once I was at Michigan Radio, I really fell in love with audio journalism. And I decided to stick with it and see how it panned out as a career path. So I was in Michigan for a little bit, doing work at Michigan Radio, and then I moved on to WESA in Pittsburgh, which is a great public radio station. If you have the pleasure of working with them, I hope you have a great experience because it was wonderful working there. But when I started at WESA, I wasn't really doing science stuff. I was doing a lot of politics and a lot of like city news types of things. And then after a couple years there, I started to think about expanding my reporting to cover the tech sector in Pittsburgh, which if you live there, you know that tech and science is a huge part of Pittsburgh's economy. So I kind of finagled starting to cover the tech sector in Pittsburgh and a little more science news. And I just loved it. It was such a great opportunity. I got to meet so many cool people doing amazing things in Pittsburgh. And then after about a year of doing that, this opening at Science Friday came up, and I thought, you know what, I really love doing the science journalism. This would be a little bit different, but I really want to apply and see if I can get it. I kind of applied with the idea that, okay, this is a real long shot goal. And then I got it. So moved out east, and that is where I'm at right now. That's my brief history.
Sure. So this is a super remedial question, but it's something that I've always kind of wondered. I work media adjacent, and I work with a lot of producers like yourself. But I've always been kind of curious. I mean, like, what is the difference between working as a producer versus working as a reporter? I mean, is it similar to in the written world where we have reporters and editors, or I mean, just what's it like to be a producer?
Yeah, it's a little bit like that reporter and editor relationship in that I like to say as a reporter, you're writing for yourself. And as a producer, you're often writing for somebody else. So I would say most of the time, the far majority of the time at Science Friday, I am writing scripting and questions for our host, whose name is Ira Flato, who's a great guy. If you listen to the show, he's exactly how you picture him when you listen to the show. So it really is this, going into a producer role, you have to kind of be okay with the fact that you are going to be working on something that people aren't really going to peg the ownership onto you. They're going to peg the ownership onto the host, which is something that I'm actually fine with. Some people have a hard time with that power dynamic, and so they don't really like the producer role as much. But I think it's a really interesting place to be because, because we are not hosting things as much, that time, a lot of that time is spent, talking to scientists, kind of doing these pre-interviews, which are often a little more, which aren't as buttoned up. They're a little more casual and getting to know people that way, and also spending a lot of time editing. So that's kind of the audio. The difference between print and audio is that a lot of our time is spent editing the tape that we get, which is its own process. But yeah, I would say that that's the main difference, is writing for yourself versus writing for somebody else.
Oh, that's really helpful. So you kind of got into this a little bit when you're describing how you spend your time, but could you take us through sort of a day in the life? Like what is it like to be a producer on Science Friday?
Sure. I'll take you through a week in the life, because as a weekly show, all of our days are a little bit different. So our show, if you haven't listened, you can guess from the name, it runs on Fridays. So basically we spend, actually before the show airs, we have a meeting where we discuss what next week's show is going to look like. So that's where we come to the table and we have all of our pitches and we say, okay, I think, it'd be really cool if we talked about COVID-19 variants, or I think it'd be really cool if we talk about this interesting paper that came out in one of the journals. And so we all come to the table, we kind of lay our pitches out, and then we, as a team, there's 6 or 7 of us on the radio team. The staff itself is a little bit bigger, but so the radio team will look at all these pitches and say, okay, these are the things we want to prioritize in next week's show. Things might change a little bit next week, but here's our plan. Here's our outline for what things are going to sound like. And then on Monday, we usually start pre-interviewing scientists or people involved in the research that we want to cover. Tuesday is usually spent writing the scripting and writing the questions for IRA. And then on Wednesdays, that's typically our recording day. So that is typically where we book the scientists, we record them sometimes over Zoom or similar platforms because as everybody is, or the far majority of people are right now, we are remote. So, and we're also talking to people oftentimes who are across the country, sometimes across the world. I mean, we had somebody who studies mummies who lives in Egypt on the show last week. So that's a cool thing with doing a pre-recorded show these days, is that we can actually talk to somebody who's in a very different time zone as us. So we record things usually on Wednesdays, and then Thursdays is typically our big editing day. So that is, as the producers, we, have Ira's tracks. This is kind of in the weeds, but we have, Ira's recording of his side of the conversation. Then we'll have the researchers recording their side of the conversation. And then that's where we put it all together and make it sound good. Because oftentimes it doesn't sound very good when you're actually recording. So that is the job of the producer, to make things sound clean and like people are not in 2 different time zones. It's always best if we can make people sound like they're in the same room. So that is usually our goal at the end of the day. And then Friday, we start the whole thing over again.
Wow, that's quite the week. So, Arvin kind of alluded to this. I mean, radio is a very different medium than the written word. And, I work with a lot of scientists and try to prep them for, how to give a good interview for radio versus, a good written word interview. And I'm just curious, I mean, do you have any tips for folks about, like, if I'm a scientist talking about my work, what are the common mistakes that you see people making, and like how can you tell a story really well for radio?
Yeah, I think the number one mistake that we get from most scientists, or not most scientists, but the number one mistake we see from scientists is that they are very buttoned up, and they are very jargony in what they're talking about. So you hear so often, if somebody is nervous or if somebody hasn't done a lot of radio interviews, they will kind of go into these tangents where they are using like basically words that nobody else would know unless they were really well versed in their specific form of science. And so we really want to take people out of that. And one of the things I actually used to tell scientists at WESA all the time is, okay, I want you to explain this to me like you're talking to your grandmother. Or, or also explain this to me like you're talking to, somebody in the first grade. So you really want to, I mean, for lack of a better word, you kind of want to dumb down your answers a little bit and be able to talk through things in a way where the average person can get a sense of what you're talking about. And especially for us, because we're a public radio show, people can turn on the radio at between 2 and 4 p.m. on Fridays and hear our show. I mean, whoever's listening to that, they probably don't have a PhD in, chemistry or whatever this person is well versed in. They might be a long road trucker. They may be, somebody who's doing the dishes at home who's like kind of half paying attention. So you really need to be able to communicate your science in a way that is understandable for people. Getting there can be a little bit tough, but honestly, that is something that practice, usually with enough practice, people can get to that point. But yeah, that's the number one mistake, I would say.
Yeah, that sounds really familiar. And I feel like it kind of transcends mediums too. I mean, if you're really jargony, then you're going to be hard to quote no matter what the medium. So yeah, a lot of long road truckers in your audience there for Science Friday.
You'd be surprised. It's a big NPR audience because, like, I mean, you cross state lines and you'll probably still be able to hit an NPR station somewhere. You continue the story.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, and it's so important to think about who your audience is. So I bet you've got great stats on that too. I'm also curious about, like, this idea of storytelling in an audio only format. So, I know when you were at WESA, there were opportunities where you could like come to the lab and get this environmental picture of the lab. Do you try to use sound that way on Science Friday? What are the opportunities? And like in a COVID world, how do you do that?
Yeah, so I'm in a unique situation where I actually started this job the week that it was the week that New York City shut down indoor dining. So that was like really the first sign that things were getting really, really serious with COVID. So I started completely remotely, basically, which was a weird place to be, obviously. And maybe other people here have started new jobs in that time frame and they can relate to that. But yeah, so I don't have as much of a sense of what was happening before then, but I can tell you that, our show is based in New York City. There's science going on everywhere. So, I mean, we wouldn't have that opportunity necessarily to visit other labs and stuff on a good day in a non-COVID world. So it is a different situation, obviously. One thing that's good about Science Friday that I think gives listeners a better sense of what's going on, that may fill that void a little bit, is that we actually have a lot of time in our show. So we're often talking to scientists for like 12 to like 17 minutes about their work. So you really can get a good sense of what somebody's day-to-day life is like in that time frame. So yeah, we don't have that opportunity as much. I mean, I would love to, but we're able to, I think, fill that void in some other ways.
Yeah, that's totally fair. So I mean, speaking of the pandemic, like, what do you think is the most challenging part of trying to produce a radio show right now? And I mean, are there any benefits? Like maybe the sound is actually really excellent inside your closet.
I will say that it's obviously been very interesting. Our show, weirdly, used to be a completely live show. Like right before COVID, our show was completely live. And the first week of the pandemic, like the first week that I started, the show completely changed to a pre-recorded format. So basically the job I was hired to do did not exist when I got there, which was a whole curveball and a whole situation. Weirdly, I'm like a little bit better suited for the job I'm doing now than the job that I like maybe was hired to do, because the pre-production aspect is more similar to what I was doing at WESA. But I mean, that was a whole change that happened. But I mean, I would say that, and other people can probably relate to this, I mean, one of the hardest things for me has been the fact that, I mean, we are doing so much reporting on COVID right now, in the midst of this like really terrible pandemic, which has been like really draining and really exhausting. And I'm sure there are a lot of people here who can relate to that. So that has been really tough. But I would say that the silver lining of that is that we are in a position where we are bringing good, accurate information to people all over the country in a time where there is so much misinformation about this. So it is very different, and it is tough for sure. But it does feel good to know that we are like hopefully making a difference in people's lives and giving them good information that they can use.
I'll help if I unmute myself. We're starting to get some questions in the chat, and I just wanted to ask one more thing before we start taking those questions, because I really wanted to get this one in. So Science Friday has 3 different podcasts, and it seems like these days podcasts are popping up all over the place. And so you just talk, if you could, just talk a little bit about, what it's like to produce audio for that platform. And, maybe if you have any advice for somebody that is on the line that might be thinking about maybe starting up their own podcast, I think that'd be really interesting.
Absolutely. So I'll say that Science Friday, when I said a little bit earlier that our radio team is like 7 to 8 people, we do have a whole team that does the podcast stuff. So I'm not directly involved in our podcasts. The one that is releasing new episodes right now, if anybody's interested, is called Science Addiction. And it's all about the science behind words. So it's a different angle on science, but it's really interesting. But I would say that if you're interested in starting a podcast, you really need to think about what your angle is, because the truth is there are so many podcasts out there. So you have to think about what's going to set yours apart. Who's your audience? Who is this for? I would say, on a personal note, some of my favorite podcasts are ones that like really dive deep into something very specific. So, I mean, whether that's like the rise and fall of a specific tech company, or there's one that I love that's like science adjacent, that's all about like bogus health health fads, things that probably, I don't know if that applies to anybody here, but there are just so many podcasts out there, so you really have to like slim down what you want to talk about, or just have an angle that you think people are going to grapple onto. Another thing I'll say is that sound quality is super important. That kind of seems like a no-brainer, but there are a lot of podcasts out there where the sound quality is really bad. And the truth is your audience is not going to stick with you if it's hard to listen to. So there's actually a lot of great audio editing stuff on YouTube for free that, if you're interested in this, I would really dive into those videos and try to learn the ropes that way. And, you really don't need super expensive equipment. You can use a lot of free tools actually to pull something together. But yeah, I would just advise you to think about sound quality and just think really, really deeply about what your angle is.
Yeah, that's great advice. So I don't want to hog the platform. So if anybody else that's on the call would like to ask a question, can you raise your hand and we'll call on you and unmute you? And ideally turn your camera on just so it's a little bit more conversational. Or I could ask another question too.
Aaron, there are some questions in the chat that we could kick off.
Sure, we could read from that, sure. So Deb Stein asked, how do you handle the interface of science, technology, and policy? Really interesting.
Yeah, so we don't do a whole lot of policy segments on our show, but we have done a few recently, and I'm actually like working on one this week. We did one last week about tech workers unionizing, which was something that was a little bit out of our usual breadth of subjects, but we felt it was, because we have Amazon workers trying to unionize, Google workers trying to unionize, that's something that's like specifically happening in Pittsburgh too, that we felt that, we don't have tech without workers. So that was a topic that, even though it was a little bit different than what we usually cover, it was more policy led. That was something that was important for us to cover. We have also been interviewing a few people, and we're like trying to interview people who are part of Biden's administration. So that is definitely more policy oriented. And I'm working on a story this week that'll run, I think, next week, about in the state of Oregon has decriminalized small amounts of all drugs. I don't know if anybody has heard about this, but it was a pretty crazy measure that passed in the November election, and it has recently gone into effect. So taking a look at like how, this policy will impact healthcare there. So we don't do a lot of policy stuff, but when we do, I think it turns out well, hopefully. And it's definitely an important part of science that we sometimes neglect as science journalists, I would say.
Hey, can you hear me? Okay, so, and I don't know if I'm going to formulate this question right, but something I've been curious about is if you can see your audience numbers at all, if the audience is more interested in topics that are COVID related, when you have episodes that are striving on COVID, or if you're seeing any kind of fatigue on that and people are back to wanting episodes that are anything but.
Yeah, we are in the process right now of actively like trying to get that data. So I don't have that off the top of my head. I can say that we get really good feedback when we do certain COVID stories. For example, we had a segment a few weeks ago where we had, we were realizing that we were getting a ton of listener questions about vaccines, and like all over the place about vaccines. So we knew that was something that was on a lot of people's minds, as it is everywhere. So we had a virologist come on and we basically just peppered him with questions. And we have a tool where it's called our Vox Pop app, where people can actually submit their voice, submit their questions in their own voice. So we had this segment where we basically had like just a ton of listener questions. You heard the listener, and then you had the virologist directly respond to those questions. That segment did really, really well. People were responded really well to that. We actually heard from somebody who was in the Gulf War, and she said that she was really hesitant to take the vaccine because she had experience with medicines that were said to be safe and were not. And she was like, the segment actually like convinced me that it's safe to get a COVID vaccine. So, you know, when we're getting feedback like that, that is like pretty incredible. But I will also say that, some people, I think, and especially pre-COVID, I think Science Friday kind of had this, this reputation of being maybe a little bit silly. So we would talk about science topics that were maybe a little bit random, I guess, for lack of a better term, that were a little bit more fun. And so we have definitely not done as many of those because we are dealing with a very serious thing in our lives right now. But I will say that when we do go into something that's a little bit less serious and a little more fun, we also get great feedback about that. So I think people are interested in a mix of things right now. I do think people do have so many questions about COVID and they want their questions answered. But once their questions are answered, they kind of want to take a little bit of a brain break and learn about something that's a little bit more fun.
Makes a lot of sense. Thanks.
All right, so I'm going to go to Michelle Baum for the next question. I'm going to unmute you. Okay.
I just wondered how the pre-recording has affected your call-in segment, because that's one of my favorite parts of the show. I really people are so curious, and sometimes folks ask some of the coolest questions.
Right. Yeah, I definitely get that. Because as I mentioned earlier, our show used to be a live show, but because of COVID, we were kicked out of our studio space basically. And so we had to move. We were forced to go to this pre-recorded format. And that is our biggest loss for sure in that format, is that we don't get the opportunity of opening up the phone lines and getting listener questions. We have tried to amend that a little bit with this Vox Pop app that I was talking about, where people can submit their own questions. But it's not as easy because a lot of people, there's a barrier to entry because you need a smartphone to use it. And not everybody is well versed enough in their phones to be able to really to do that successfully. And so it's definitely not as easy as just calling a phone number and getting on the radio. But we have really tried to implement those as much as possible. And we also take questions sometimes over Twitter and over Facebook. Obviously not everybody's on Twitter or Facebook either, but we're hoping that we can get to a mixed format once COVID has lightened up a little bit and we can get back into a studio space. So hopefully we will be taking listener questions again. It's just a matter of when we can have access to a studio space again and when it's safe for us to go in.
Thanks, that was a really great question. So Mark Roth has had his hand up for a little while. I'm gonna ask you to unmute. All right.
I'm here. Yeah, I have a couple of process questions. So when you were talking about trying to get scientists to speak in understandable terms, do you ever find yourself actually rehearsing or engaging with them to try and get them to simplify their language, where you're actually suggesting other ways they might say something That's my first question. The second one is, I'm really curious with a typical segment, how much editing down you have to do. In other words, what kind of length are you starting with that you have to boil things down to for the show?
Yeah, two really good questions. Remind me your first question one more time, just so I don't miss it. Oh,
yeah, it's the thing about getting
the
scientists to speak understandably.
Yeah, so for all the segments we do before we get somebody in a room, in a Zoom room with Ira, the producer on that segment will do a pre-interview with that scientist. And yeah, there are definitely times where we will ask them, I usually try to ask them the same questions that I know Ira is going to ask them, to kind of give them a practice round, as well as learn a little bit more about their research. And there are definitely times where somebody will give me an answer and I will say, you know, okay, how would you say that to somebody who has no idea about, you know, physics or whatever? So there definitely is some preparing that goes on in the pre-interview. And sometimes we will even share questions in advance with the scientists we'll have on, so that they can have it in front of them. And some people like to write their answers in the questions during the interview, or they'll you know, have that in front of them during the interview. I know that's kind of controversial in the journalism world, so if anybody has questions about that, I'm happy to answer. But we think of it kind of as a courtesy in a lot of times, because I mean, we're dealing with people who sometimes are not used to being on the radio and they're very nervous. So we kind of want to give them the benefit of the doubt as much as possible. In terms of how much we have to edit down, it totally depends on what the segment is. I will say last week, I actually produced an interview with Dr. Fauci, which was very, very cool. And we had, his press people were very strict about how much time we had with him. So as soon as, you know, we started at 2, as soon as it was 2:30, they were like, okay, bye. And with him, we really didn't have to cut anything from that interview, because he is obviously very used to talking to people and giving concise answers, and not even concise, but giving answers that don't really need to be edited down. And also he's one of the most respected scientists out there right now. So we didn't really want to cut anything down if we could avoid it. But then other times, we find this a lot with talking to scientists who aren't used to speaking on the radio, is that they go on tangents sometimes that we don't really want to put on the radio, because we either don't have time or it's just not relevant. And so in those cases, we typically do have to cut those down quite a bit. Also, if you talk to a scientist that has a lot of ums or stutters in their answers, we typically take a virtual eraser to those too, just to make them more concise.
Really interesting stuff. So is it Anna or Anna Holland? I know you had asked a question in the chat, I think. Would you like to unmute and ask your question verbally?
Yes, thank you. My name is Anna. And Kathleen, it sounds like you've been in a lot of different cities and have had a lot of experiences. So I was wondering, what has been one of your most memorable interviews or assignments? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I would say that my most memorable one at Science Friday so far has probably been this Dr. Fauci interview that I did last week, because he is a very interesting person to talk to. And that was a very, very cool experience. I would say, trying to think, I mean, there's just so much, when I was at WESA, there was just so much going on all the time. That was very cool. I did a couple stories about Astrobotic in Pittsburgh, which Pittsburgh people will probably know is a company that is building, I don't want to butcher what they're doing, but they are building things that go up into space, and are working on these, and are working on getting like civilian artifacts to the moon. So they're basically like, you can pay a certain amount of money to send up like a photo of yourself to the moon and it'll just stay there. Working with them and talking to them about their mission is like very interesting and strange and very cool. So yeah, I'll think if there's something that comes to my mind later, but off the top of my head, those are some of the coolest things I've done.
That was a fun one. I know you have some burning questions, Arvin. Do you want to ask them now?
Yeah, sure. I'll ask one, and then if there's nobody else, I'll ask another one too. So how many producers are there on the Science Friday team with the amount of stories that you have to put out?
Mm-hmm. We have, so it is me, and then we have we have two other producers. We have a senior producer, and then we have our director who ends up producing usually one segment a week. So that's 5 of us. And then plus Ira, who has a lot on his plate every week as well, as the host of the show. So it's a team of 6, and then we have a digital team too that's kind of adjacent to us that works on getting our stuff on the website.
Cool. Speaking of the director, I know Charles Berquist. I follow him on Twitter, and he often posts crazy pitches that he gets. What's the craziest pitch that you've received?
Yeah, so what Arvin is talking about, our director Charles, who's very funny, he has kind of this running bit on Twitter where he will post fake responses to ridiculous pitches he gets, which are often like completely irrelevant. So it'll be like, thank you for emailing us about this promotion of a dental assistant to a dentist in this town in Wisconsin, but this is not a good fit for Science Friday. So it's a little bit tongue-in-cheek. I hope it doesn't come across as too mean. I get so many pitches that are from people who clearly have no idea who, it's clearly just being sent out to a million people. Like I get pitches for CBD products daily, for like candles all the time, for essential oils all the time, things that are like so not relevant to us that it's a little bit funny. Yeah, I get a lot of those, but I get a lot of good pitches too, but those are some daily ones. Oh, okay. We have a special guest. Let me put it down.
On that same vein, what would you recommend to somebody who wants to pitch your show?
Yeah.
What are the things that you're looking for?
I would say, and I would assume that everybody here would be a relevant pitch for Science Friday if you are in the PR world. Don't pitch me essential oils, but definitely pitch me just like cool things that are happening in your town that you think could be relevant to a national audience. And that's kind of the tough part, I would say, about pitches is that, you know, there might be something really, really cool going on in Pittsburgh that would be a great fit for WESA, but it's a little bit harder to figure out kind of a national angle for some of those things. I will say we've had some people from UPMC on Science Friday recently, talking about COVID-19, talking about some other research that they've been doing. But I would just say like making sure your pitch could apply to a national audience. And one thing that I know is not necessarily sustainable for everybody, but I will say that the best relationships I have with PR people who pitch me regularly are ones who have actually been like, hey, do you want to get on the phone and just talk so that I know what you're interested in and like what pitches you're looking for. I mean, that is huge. And I know that's a time constraint that not everybody has. But I mean, I'm so much more likely to bring a pitch to an editorial meeting if I know the person who has pitched it to me, and I trust that what they're saying is, accurate and good. Again, I know that's not necessarily sustainable for everybody, but I would recommend that if you have some time, just being like, hey, can we hop on the phone for 5 minutes? I'm just interested in learning a little bit more about what you're interested in.
Yeah, I think most PR people would be happy to get on the phone with a producer for Science Friday. Make the time for that. That's interesting. Speaking of sort of working in WNYC, you alluded to this a little bit. What is the difference between that and a local station like WESA? What are better? What is better, and what would you find you're like, oh, I can't do this as much as I could do at WESA?
Yeah. We are kind of in a unique position where we are owned, or we are distributed by WNYC, but we are kind of our own like floating entity in the NPR universe. So we have like our own separate office and stuff, but we do rely on WNYC for a lot of support. And I will say that it is more bureaucratic than it is at a smaller station like WESA, where there's just, I mean, so many more employees and so much more going on, honestly, that it can be a little bit tough to get the ball rolling on certain things. But I will say the Science Friday team is really open to innovation and is really open to trying new things. I mean, one thing that you would have never heard on the show 2 years ago is a producer hosting a segment. Like you would exclusively hear Ira, but I mean, if you listen to the show these days, I mean, we usually have at least one segment that is hosted not by Ira. It's hosted by me, or it's hosted by one of the other producers. And that's a completely new thing that honestly started because of the pandemic and because we had limited resources and we were like, all hands on deck, let's just do something different. And because Ira doesn't have time to do all these things. So there is a little bit more room for experimentation in some ways. We are definitely more hampered down by bureaucracy in other ways. But yeah, it's an interesting kind of point in the triangle to be.
So I have a question. And this kind of relates to the thread about pitches, right? So some story ideas come from a PR person who pitches you, but I'm also curious. I mean, where else do you find stories? I mean, are you looking on Twitter? Are you like, reading table of contents for some of the top journals? Like, where do your ideas come from?
Yeah, I will say I spend like too much time on Twitter, probably for my mental health, but I do get a lot of stories from there. A lot of our stories do come from like, what are people talking about these days? I mean, are people talking about COVID variants? Are people talking about the Mars Perseverance rover, which landed, God, was that last week? Yes, I think that was last week. It might have been yesterday. I feel like my sense of time is very skewed right now. But that happened recently and we covered it on the show. So, what are people talking about? Obviously we get some of those things in pitches as well, from NASA or from, whatever big organization. But we do spend a lot of time reading research that comes out of the journals. We use Eureka Alert. I don't know if other people are familiar with that, but that basically is a system that compiles research that's coming out of all the journals. And if you're a journalist, you can look at the embargoed stuff, which is pretty cool. So we use that a lot. So I would say it's mostly a mix of those three things. The first one being just like, what are people talking about?
Yeah, that's really interesting. Does anybody else that's on the line have a question? I want to make sure we're able to get to everybody before.
Laura has her hand raised.
Yeah, Laura.
All right, it took me longer than I expected to figure out how to raise my hand in a Zoom call, so that was apparently a first. Thanks for joining us. I was wondering, just with audio in general, I feel like one of the limitations that I've run into is when you find an awesome study or an awesome story that you want to cover, and you find that the individuals that you want to speak to are fine in terms of English comprehension for a conversation, but maybe are non-native speakers or have a thick enough accent. Have you found any way to work around that? And has that changed at all with a pre-recorded show?
Yeah, that's definitely something we come across a lot. And we definitely want to give, people who have great science coming out or are working on cool things, we want to have them on kind of no matter what a lot of the time. So you do definitely hear a lot of accents on Science Friday. We definitely make sure that people are understandable for an audience. And, you know, because a lot of people who listen to our show are often doing other things during that time, like they're washing the dishes or they're like in the car, you want to make sure you get the clearest sound as possible on them. So honestly, in those cases, a lot of the time we will ask people to record their end of the conversation themselves, which is a trick that you use a lot in the audio world, to get kind of that in the same room sound where, you know, if you have an iPhone, and I think Androids have something similar, you have an app on your phone that's built in that's called voice memos. So we basically teach people that, you know, during the interview, just have that voice memos app running, hold that up to your mouth during the conversation with Ira. And once you're done, send that tape to us and we get really good sound quality from there. So we usually prioritize using that with those speakers, just because, you know, we want to get the best sound quality as possible out of all guests, but, you know, clarity is very important, obviously, for a radio show. I will say that we did something really interesting. I couldn't even tell you when this was, but a few months ago, we had a guest on who is deaf, and she wrote a book that's all about the science behind like quote unquote miracle cures for deafness. So this is, she's a historian, she's super, super interesting. And we really wanted to have her on the show. And she's a good speaker, but there were points in the conversation where they were a little bit unclear. And also it was very important for her to have her conversation be as accessible as possible for other deaf and hard of hearing people, which radio is not a very accessible platform for that. So she actually worked with us very closely to set up we did that conversation over Zoom, we recorded it with the video, and then we released that on our YouTube channel and on Facebook, and did kind of a listening and watching party for that. And we kind of superimposed ASL interpreters in the bottom of that screen, and we had captions running as well. So that was a really cool experimentation we did that worked really well, and we really want to incorporate things like that more often because we want our content to be as accessible as possible for people. I know that's not exactly what you were asking, but that's like an adjacent thing that we did that we were really proud of. That worked out really well.
Very cool. Thank you.
That was a really cool story. So we're winding down, but I wanted to get to maybe we'll take our final question from Andrew Boyles.
Hi. Are there opportunities for freelance writers, either or as working in research and production, or for your website?
Sure. So I will say our podcasts have more of those opportunities right now. Our Science Diction team, which is the name of the podcast that is running right now, they had a call out for freelancers a little while ago. I don't know if they're actively using people right now because they're in the middle of their season running, so they're not like producing new content right now. But we do actually have a form, and I can send this to Aaron to send out to all of you, but we do have a form that we encourage people to fill out. That's kind of our freelancer database, so that, you know, if you're a writer and or if you're a researcher or whatever your specialty is, if you're an audio producer, if you're a graphic designer, we encourage people to fill this form out. And so we have you in our database. So, you know, when we're looking for a freelance writer or a digital person or what have you, we can look at our list and say, okay, these are good people that we can count on. We are kind of in the process of setting up a little bit more of a system for freelance audio content, which I don't know how applicable that is to people here, but we are like in the middle of setting something like that up, which we will probably broadcast that information once we know about it. But it's not a lot of solid information for you, but I will definitely pass on that form to Aaron or to this team afterwards so that everybody can access it if they want.
Yeah, totally. We can definitely share that on our Facebook group and put it on the website when we share this video. That was a great question, that's a pretty nice one to end on. So I think Arvind had a couple more things you want to say just about the group in general, and thanks so much, Kathleen, for doing this. It was a fascinating conversation. It was really great to talk to you.
This was really fun. Thank you so much for having me. I had a great time, and you can find me, not to like self-promo, but if you have questions after the fact, I mean, you can find me on Twitter. My email address is kdavis@sciencefriday.com. Feel free to reach out, send me pitches, just not about essential oils.
That's
But thank you guys.
Definitely worth the plug. Thank you again for joining us. This is amazing. And as an honorary Pittsburgher, it's great to have you back virtually with us. To the rest of the group, thank you all for joining us. We're pretty excited. This was a very nice crowd. I'm just going to share my screen, and you can find us on Facebook, AppSciComm, Twitter, AppSciRI. Website is appscicom.org. Sign up to our lists to receive notifications of future events. And if you have any questions, and if you want to join us, help us, email appscicom@gmail.com, or really any of us are easily findable. Once again, thank you, and have a great day. Thank you, Erin, for being an amazing host.